providing input to consultants and staff regarding the scope of the draft EIR, and does not constitute commentary on the draft plan itself or the draft EIR. So it's simply on the kind of scoping for that draft EIR. The outline of the draft general plan update and maps were provided with that notice of preparation. In the first place, obviously at this point, it is now joined by the entire draft general plan update. So what are we doing today? The presentation is not legally required, and it's not part of the legally required public review period for the draft plan and EIR. But staff and consultants felt that due to the lengthy incubation period for the draft, the considerable work done by citizens and by the Planning Commission, that it warranted a public debut and kind of warm-up to the public review process. So that's what we are doing today. Our goal is to thoroughly familiarize you with the document, so as we move forward, you'll be able to find stuff in the document as well, and when the draft EIR comes out, you'll have a familiarity with the draft general plan update with which to compare the draft EIR. We want to present the key issues that have come up during the development phase and then answer any questions that you might have. There is no action in particular that is proposed for today. It is truly a debut for the draft general plan update. The draft EIR associated with this will be similarly debuted in 2 months on September 22nd. And during the subsequent public review period, so that's going to take place once the draft EIR is available, the Planning Commission will hold a meeting and the board will hold a public hearing in October. The public review period will close in November, and then consultants and staff will focus over the next several months on reading and responding to all the input they've received, as well as revising the drafts as appropriate. So we've got our work cut out for us. Again, I want to be clear that the public review period time clock is not beginning at this point. This is kind of a bonus couple of months prior to the draft EIR coming out. We are on the home stretch. We appreciate your time and attention to this very important process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison.
And I'd like to introduce Eric Norris, Senior Consultant with PMC and author of large parts of this, with a lot of help from the communities that we serve. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Get all the electronics set here. Chairman, members of the board, thank you again for having us here. As Allison said, this is indeed a momentous occasion. She kindly put some dates to it. I was just going to say that we were all much younger when this started.
We all were.
Grown up along with the plan. But what we wanted to do was just, as she said, running briefly through the plan. We hadn't intended to go through individual policies, but we're certainly willing, here to do that. If you have any questions about anything in particular, we will try and point out some of the more, the more important changes from the plan that you currently have that show up in this document. As Allison said, the basic direction that we've been working under since 2001 is to update the plan, address new issues. There have also been changes in state law about what a general plan has to do since the last one was adopted. So we're going to make sure that you're up to date with all the requirements that affect general plans. Some of the things that we were also told to do and not do as we were coming up with the new plan is, one, to avoid sweeping changes in policy. As Allison mentioned, the basic intent, the basic principles that are in your current general plan are carried forward into this new draft. We haven't made major changes. We wanted to minimize new regulations, new limitations on property use. That was direction we got both from you and from the Planning Commission as we kind of touched base a number of times during the process. A preference for market-based approaches over mandates. One example of that is an item that was discussed several times by the Planning Commission about what kind of agriculture the county should be promoting, and the determination there was let the farmer decide. Open up the range of possibilities, but let the farmer decide what to grow on his or her land. And then finally, to minimize the number and cost of implementation measures. That was a specific discussion that we had several months ago, making the plan as easy to implement as possible, making it as easy as possible for property owners, developers, et cetera, to follow the mandates that are in the plan. The update covers 5 parts of your general plan. There are more than 5 parts, and I'll get to what the other 2 are in a moment. But the 5 that are in the update that are being changed from what you currently have are the introduction, a chapter on planning principles, we'll talk about those in a second, the development element, and a resource management element. Those 2 combine several other elements that you currently have into 2. And finally, a section on community policies, which deal with all the various communities, Anderson Valley, Covelo, and so on. Now, there are 2 parts of the plan that are not being changed. There's a housing element is scheduled for update next year. You're on a time frame, along with a number of other cities and counties across the state, to update your element for next year. And the coastal element, which is also being updated separately. So those, when you look in this draft, just show up as placeholders because they're not being changed for this update. When we're finally done, we do intend to make the entire plan look the same, all the text and the graphics and so on, but the words won't change in these 2 parts. So as Allison mentioned, just kind of the path that we followed to get here, beginning with the current general plan back in 2001. Around 2005, there was something called a framework plan, which was kind of a very early draft of all the policies and actions in the plan. It was released in about 2005. We turned that last year into something we called a working draft, which is a document that people have been looking at for a while now and asking when's the next draft going to come out, which is the one that is here today. So what we have in front of you now is comments on basically all those documents that have come in through the last 6 or 7 years, and in particular the last couple of years in workshops throughout the county that we've had several rounds of workshops, often several workshops in various places. The general plan is available on the website. I think it was released on the 17th of last week, and the official copy is dated July 21st, so you'll see that, which is today's date. There are a couple of errata sheets, as is typical when you're dealing with a document of this size. There were some changes that came up at the last minute. Those are basically 2 sets. Errata sheet number 1 are changes that came up from the Planning Commission meeting 1 week ago today, and that was simply because in order to get the document produced, we had to print it before that Planning Commission meeting was done, and that was, again, because of the fires out there, and we appreciate the community coming out to the meeting on the 14th and helping us work through that last set of changes. So you will see an errata sheet number 1 in there with changes that came from that meeting. Those affect 2 parts of the plan. One is the Anderson Valley section, and the other is changes to the development element and the resource management element. One thing that came up in that meeting was that there were some good policy ideas that came from the community that really deserved to be implemented countywide. So we said, well, and got direction from the Planning Commission to make those countywide policies. So you'll see some changes. So you'll see some new policies in there in those 2 elements. You'll also see some revised policies. And then we updated the Anderson Valley section, which is in Section 6. Errata sheet number 2 contains a few additional changes. A couple of important things. One is there's a mixed-use land use designation shown in here now. That's being handled a little bit differently than it was when we printed the draft, but it's basically giving you a mixed-use land use designation, a more transit-friendly, a more walkable, more sustainable or green type of land use designation to use. It doesn't show up on the land use map yet, but it's there in case you want to use it in the future. So you won't, if you look at the land use map and look for the mixed use, you won't find it. It's just a holding place right now. If you want to use it in the future, it's there for you. There's a policy in support of childcare and an action related to that, and then just a couple of other minor cleanup items. So both of those are